225 BCE, the banks of the Tagus River in Iberia. A Roman legionnaire faces a Celtiberian warrior whose iron longsword has already killed 2 men this morning. The Celt swings downward with both hands, a strike meant to cleave shoulder to sternum. The Roman steps inside the arc of the blade too close for the longsword to generate force and drives upward with a blade no longer than his forearm. The Celtiberian gasps, stumbles, and falls. The weapon that just killed him weighs less than 3 pounds and measures barely 2 feet long, yet it has rendered his superior reach meaningless. Within a century, this same blade pattern will break every major army between the Atlantic and the Euphrates. For 300 years, Rome had fought with weapons borrowed from their neighbours. The hasta, a thrusting spear inherited from Greek hoplite warfare. The spatha, a slashing sword adapted from Celtic designs. These weapons reflected a fundamental problem in Roman military thinking during the early Republic. They were trying to fight like everyone else. At Cannae in 216 BCE, Hannibal's forces slaughtered 50,000 Romans in a single afternoon. The legions carried longswords that day, weapons designed for sweeping cuts in open formation. When Hannibal's cavalry compressed the Roman lines into a suffocating mass, those longswords became useless. Men couldn't generate the space needed to swing. They died pressed against their brothers, their weapons pinned at their sides. In the forests of Germania, Roman columns equipped with cavalry-style slashing swords found themselves ambushed in terrain where branches hung at head height. Germanic tribesmen, fighting beneath the canopy with short axes and sea-axes, cut the legionaries apart while Roman blades caught on tree limbs. At the Battle of Heraclea in 280 BCE, Pyrrhus of Epirus watched Roman soldiers struggle to penetrate the armour of his phalangites, their cutting swords glancing off bronze plate that a thrusting weapon might have penetrated. The pattern was clear. Rome's enemies were either fighting at distances where Roman weapons couldn't reach, or in conditions where those weapons couldn't function. What Rome needed was something that worked everywhere, in every condition, against every enemy, regardless of terrain or formation density. The solution came from the people Rome was trying to conquer. During the brutal campaigns in Iberia, Roman officers noticed something about the swords carried by Celtiberian mercenaries. These weapons, called the Gladius hispaniensis, were short, broad, and designed around a principle that seemed counterintuitive to Mediterranean warfare. The point mattered more than the edge. Where Greek and Celtic swords were designed to cut, the Iberian blade was built to penetrate. The Romans didn't just copy the design, they refined it. The gladius that emerged from Roman forges around 200 BCE represented a complete rethinking of what a sword should do. The blade measured 18 to 22 inches from guard to point, short enough that a man could draw it in a shield wall, where shoulders touched shoulders, long enough to reach vital organs from any angle of attack. The width at the guard measured 2 to 3 inches, providing mass for deep penetration. The taper was gradual, maintaining cutting ability along the entire edge while concentrating force at a reinforced point designed to punch through armour, bone, and the human body's natural resistance to penetration. This was not a dueling weapon or a cavalry sabre. This was a killing tool optimized for the specific conditions Rome fought in. Dense formations, varied terrain, and enemies wearing everything from naked skin to layered bronze. The manufacturing process revealed Roman pragmatism at scale. Forges in Italia and Hispania produced gladi, using pattern welding techniques that layered harder steel along the edges with more flexible iron at the core. This prevented the blade from shattering on impact with shields or armour, while maintaining an edge sharp enough to shave hair. The tang extended through a wooden grip wrapped in leather, secured by a bronze pommel that served double duty as a skull-crushing weight in close quarters. A Roman smith could produce a gladius in roughly 40 hours of work, fast enough to equip the legions Rome was rapidly expanding, cheap enough that losing one in battle didn't represent a strategic loss. The scabbard design mattered as much as the blade itself. Romans wore the gladius on their right hip, not their left, like most Mediterranean warriors. This allowed the draw in a shield wall formation, where men stood shoulder to shoulder. A left hip draw would require reaching across the body, impossible when pressed against your comrades. The right hip draw was a simple forward pull, and the blade was in your hand before an enemy closing distance could react. The true genius of the gladius appeared in how Romans were trained to use it. Legionaries spent hours practicing a single motion. Step forward with the shield, drive the point upward into the abdomen beneath the enemy's ribcage, withdraw, reset. Vegetius, writing centuries later about Roman training methods, described recruits practicing thrusts against wooden posts, aiming for specific targets marked on the wood. The instructors emphasized economy of motion. A slash requires recovering your arm from an extended position, creating a gap in your defense. A thrust keeps your weapon between you and your enemy, maintains your shield position, and returns to guard immediately. The Romans calculated that a legionary trained in this method could deliver a killing thrust in under 2 seconds from guard position, recover, and be ready for the next engagement. In dense formation, this meant the front rank of a Roman advance was effectively a walking wall of spear points operating at sword range, each man delivering rapid thrusts while the shield wall maintained integrity. At Cynoscephalae in 197 BCE, Roman legions faced the Macedonian phalanx, the most sophisticated infantry formation of the Hellenistic world. The phalanx carried sarissas, pikes measuring 18 feet, weapons that should have kept the Romans at bay indefinitely. But phalanxes required flat ground and space to maneuver. When the Roman cavalry broke the Macedonian line and the fighting devolved into confused melees, the sarissa became a liability. A Macedonian phalangite needed 12 feet of clearance to effectively wield his pike. A Roman legionary needed 2 feet. The Gladius turned the chaos into a slaughter. Romans stepped inside the effective range of the pikes and worked their blades in the compressed space, stabbing upward into groins, abdomens, and throats. Philip Thursiv of Macedon lost 8,000 men that day. Roman casualties numbered fewer than 700. The lesson was brutal and clear. In the messy reality of ancient combat, adaptability trumped theoretical superiority. If you're finding these deep dives into how ancient engineering changed warfare interesting, subscribing helps us keep uncovering these forgotten tactical revolutions. At Pydna, in 168 BCE, another Macedonian phalanx learned the same lesson. The battle began with the phalanx advancing in perfect formation, a forest of pike points that initially drove the Romans back. But the battlefield wasn't a parade ground. The phalanx encountered rough terrain, breaking its cohesion. Roman maniples, the flexible subunits that made legionary tactics adaptable, exploited every gap. Where the phalanx broke, Romans flowed in with their gladi, working at kissing distance where pikes were useless. The Macedonian king Perseus watched 20,000 of his men die. He surrendered the next day. The Gladius hadn't just won battles, it had made the Hellenistic way of war obsolete. The psychological dimension of the Gladius cut deeper than its physical edge. Celtic and Germanic warriors traditionally fought in loose formations that emphasized individual combat prowess. Their longswords required space to generate the momentum for devastating cuts. Roman tactics deliberately denied them that space. The legion advanced in tight formation, shields overlapping, gladii poking out between the gaps like the spines of some metal creature. Celtic warriors found themselves unable to swing their blades effectively. The choice became brutal. Either maintain distance and accept being ground down by Roman javelins and short-range thrusts, or close in where their weapons became unwieldy clubs against an opponent optimized for exactly this range. Roman historians noted that some Celtic tribes began fighting naked in the decades after encountering the legions, apparently believing that reducing weight and encumbrance might grant enough speed to overcome the Roman formation. It didn't work. The Gladius didn't care what you were wearing. It found the soft places all the same. The Gallic longsword, measuring 30 to 36 inches, represented a completely different philosophy of combat. Where the Gladius emphasized efficiency and formation fighting, the Gallic blade prioritized individual warrior prowess. The longsword could generate tremendous force in a cut, capable of severing limbs or splitting shields with a full-power swing. In single combat, a skilled Gallic warrior with room to maneuver had real advantages against a Roman legionary. The problem was that ancient warfare rarely provided those conditions. At Alesia in 52 BCE, Julius Caesar's legions besieged Vercingetorix and 80,000 Gallic warriors inside a fortified town. When relief forces arrived, Caesar found himself trapped between two armies numbering 250,000 total combatants. The Gauls had superior numbers, fierce courage, and those devastating longswords. They lost anyway. In the close quarters fighting along Caesar's fortifications, The longsword's reach became a liability. Legionaries worked their gladii in the confined spaces between siege works, killing with short economical thrusts while Gallic sword tangled in wooden stakes and earthworks. Vercingetorix surrendered after watching his relief force shattered against Roman defensive lines. The Iberian falcata, the blade pattern that inspired the Gladius, offered an interesting comparison to what Rome developed. The falcata curved forward like a meat cleaver, designed to deliver chopping blows with concentrated force at the blade's end. In the hands of a skilled Iberian warrior, a falcata could cleave through helmets and armour with shocking efficiency. Some examples survive in museums that show damage consistent with cutting through iron and bronze. But the falcata required more training to use effectively than the Gladius, and its curved blade made thrusting less effective than the Roman design. Rome took the concept of a short stabbing sword and removed the complexities. The Gladius was easier to manufacture, easier to train with, and more reliable in the specific tactical context Rome operated in. Mass formations requiring thousands of adequately trained soldiers rather than hundreds of elite warriors. Manufacturing records are incomplete, but evidence suggests Rome produced gladii on an industrial scale unprecedented in the ancient world. During the late Republic and early Empire, Rome maintained standing legions totaling between 250,000 and 400,000 soldiers depending on the period. Each legionary received a gladius upon enlistment. Assuming an average service life of 15 years for a blade before replacement, Rome needed to produce roughly 20,000 new gladii annually just for maintenance of existing forces. During periods of expansion, that number doubled or tripled. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii, Herculaneum and military sites along the Rhine and Danube suggests gladius production was distributed across the empire. Local forges produced blades to standard specifications, ensuring consistency across different legions. This logistical achievement mattered as much as the weapon's design. Rome's enemies often carried individually superior weapons crafted by master smiths, but they couldn't match the scale of Roman production. The combat record speaks through casualty figures that strain credulity until you examine the sources. At Sentinum in 295 BCE, Roman forces faced a coalition of Gauls and Samnites, fielding nearly 50,000 warriors. The Romans, newly equipped with gladius-patterned swords acquired from Iberian campaigns, killed 25,000 enemies while suffering 8,000 casualties of their own. These ratios appear consistently in battles from the Punic Wars through the conquest of Gaul. At Aquae Sextiae in 102 BCE, Marius and his legions killed 90,000 Teutones warriors while losing fewer than 1,000 Romans. The gladius wasn't solely responsible for these disparities, but it was the instrument that delivered them. Roman training and tactics created the conditions. The gladius provided the killing stroke. The gladius influenced weapon development across the Mediterranean and beyond. The Roman spatha, a longer cavalry sword developed during the imperial period, retained the gladius's emphasis on thrusting capability while adding reach for mounted combat. The migration period Germanic tribes adopted shorter gladius-influenced blade patterns after centuries of contact with Roman forces. These evolved into the Viking-era swords that dominated northern European warfare. The Byzantine spathion, used by Eastern Roman forces into the medieval period, was essentially a gladius stretched to 30 inches. The tactical principles embedded in the gladius's design, prioritizing thrusting over cutting in formation combat, persisted in European military doctrine into the age of the bayonet. That stubby Iberian blade that a Roman soldier drove upward into a Celtiberian warrior in 225 BCE evolved into the primary infantry weapon of the most successful military organization in Western history. The gladius served Rome for over 500 years, present at every major victory from Zama to Adrianople. It armed the legionaries who destroyed Carthage, conquered Gaul, and held the Rhine frontier against Germanic migrations. When the Western Empire finally collapsed in the 5th century, it wasn't because the gladius failed. It was because Rome ran out of soldiers trained to use it effectively. The blade itself remained lethal until the last legion stood down. That's not just successful weapon design, that's a fundamental redefinition of what infantry combat looked like for half a millennium.